10,000 years. Sounds like a long time. But it says when we've been there 10,000 years, it'll just be the beginning. And we need to be ready at all times for when He does come, or when He does take us out of this world. We welcome everyone to the service this morning. It's good to see everyone out on this winter morning. And we trust that as you have come to worship the Lord. Last week I said I was going to preach on Valentine's Day, and with so many people missing here this morning, I kind of struggling. Do I want to postpone that sermon, or what do I want to do? And I thought, well, maybe I ought to postpone that sermon till there's more people here, and finish up with what I started last week. Well, I studied for Valentine's Day. I didn't study for what I didn't get done last week. So I guess we're going to preach the sermon that I tried to prepare. If your spouse isn't here this morning, or when you got married, you became one. So I guess I'm going to try and preach that sermon. You know, when you think of Valentine's Day, and Dennis referred to that the other week when he read the devotions there out of Ephesians concerning how Christ loved the church so much that He gave Himself for the church, for us. And then it goes on there to speak about husbands and wives as well. But I'm going to go into the book of Genesis. You know, we're saying how great God really is. And when you stop and think how great He really is, and how that He made everything that He made, and he made it well, and yet we find that as He created creation, He made it just right. He made it perfect. And in Genesis chapter 1 there, and verse 26 and 27, it speaks there about man, how He made man. And I'm going to read them two verses out of chapter 1 and verse 26 and 27. It says there, on the sixth day, God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. And then verse 27. So God created man in His own image, and in the image of God created He him, male and female created He them. So we find that in creation, God made man, and He also made woman. And there in chapter 2 then, as we go there in chapter 2 and verse 18, we find there that God said, and the Lord God said, it is not good that man should be alone. I will make him an helpmeet for him. Now, when God created the earth, and God created everything, He said it's good. When He created man, He said it was very good. And we know that when He created the animal life, but when he made man, He breathed in him the breath of life, and man became a living soul. The thought I want to get is here. In everything that God did, he said it's good. But one thing he says here that's not good. And that is that man shouldn't be alone. He realized that when he made man needs a helper. Man needs a companion. And that's what he had in mind there in, when we come to chapter 2 and verse 20 through 25. And Adam gave names to all cattle, and to the fowl of the air, and to every beast of the field. But for Adam there was not found a helpmeet for him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs, and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made a woman, and brought her unto the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of the man. Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Now, we find here that God realized that man needed a companion. Man needed a helpmeet. Because he said there in the 18th verse that it's not good that man should be alone. And I would say, most of us would probably agree, that we find it very helpful and very comforting to have a companion. I don't know how to describe, how I would describe being alone without a companion. God knew exactly what man needs. Now here we find that as he is expressing here his thought that it's not good for man to be alone, so he makes woman and he brings them together. And Adam called her woman. And now when we think of the marriage then that he performed between them, between one man and one woman, he instituted marriage. Now God's ideal plan for marriage is one man for one woman for lifetime, for one lifetime. God's pattern for marital happiness is event when a man loves and leads his family with children, if God blesses them with children. When they obey and reverence their parents. Children, obey your parents, of course. But then when we think here with the wife who respects and supports her husband's leadership, and there in Ephesians, we find there it speaks about that man should be the head of the house. Now, he does not make man higher than the woman. He doesn't make the woman lesser than the man, even though he took the rib out of the man and made woman, but he brings them together. And as he brings them together, they become one flesh. Now, this support this marriage here supports an attitude which characterizes both the husband and the wife if they are to be successful in building a home, a happy home, a marvelous, a harmonious home. Is to support is so important in the mind of God that it was the first of 3 divine institutions and was patterned to illustrate Christ's love for the church. Christians should therefore do their part in contributing to his success of the family. First, we need to reverence God. In every marriage, we need to put God first. If we do not put God first in our marriage will probably fail. And that wasn't God's plan, that our marriage fails. Because he brought them together, and he said then there in verse 24, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Now, we've been speaking on faith. How important is faith in a marriage? Now, let's just back up a little bit. Has your faith grown in marriage? As I look back over our lifetime, our marriage, my wife and I, when we first met, there was some faith there. We had faith that this might be the person we want to spend the rest of our life with. And then as we started seeing each other more, that faith began to grow. And we finally got to the place that we decided we had enough of faith that we're going to take that step to marriage. And as we took that step, that was not the first step, but it was a great step. And we realized that if we take that step into marriage, we had faith that God's going to continue to bless our marriage, to bring us happiness and joy and a family. And as we went through our lifetime, we met up with things in life that we certainly didn't expect to meet with when we got married. But they came along in life. And I'm sure that all of us here this morning probably know of some time in your marriage that something happened, something took place that tested your faith, and probably brought you closer to God and made that marital faith stronger. I know that there were times that we met up with things in our life that we weren't sure how God's going to bring us through that situation. But we had faith that if we committed to the Lord in prayer and trust the Lord, He's going to bring us through. And He did. And that increased our marital faith, that we became stronger and drew us closer as a couple. And as we were drawn closer as a couple, our love for each other came stronger. I don't know if it's a good illustration or not, but I'm going to give it anyhow. When we were younger, and in our early part before we were married, and after we were married, why, when we would walk together, we would hold hands. Then we had children. Then we held our children's hands. And we didn't hold their hand as much as we held our children's hands. Now our children, they don't need their hands held anymore by us. Now we find that we're holding each other's hand more. And if I would have been holding my wife's hand on Friday, she wouldn't have fell.
Or you would have went with her.
Huh?
You would have went with her, maybe.
I was with her, but she walked ahead of me. She didn't wait for me. I'm not blaming her.
He's saying she might have pulled you down.
Yeah.
I don't believe it. But, you know, as we get older, we realize that we need each other more in a different way than what we did when we were younger. So, a lot of times when we go shopping or something like that and we walk across a parking lot or something like that, she'll take a hold of my arm so that she don't fall. And then, of course, I'm no different. I can stumble too, and I do sometimes. Because I realize that I don't lift my feet as high as I used to. But being together over these period of years just brings us closer together. And the more we realize that we need each other. Now, here it says, when about leaving and cleaving. Here it says, therefore, it says here in verse 24, therefore, indicates a recent conclusion in light of Adam's joy at finding a mate. Leave, here the man leaves, but note, cleave is a strong verb, meaning join. To stick together. The two verbs leave and cleave may be followed in this way. Let a man forsake or abandon his father and his mother in order that he may cleave unto his wife, in order that they become one flesh. If he does not leave, he cannot cleave, nor can they become one flesh. Thus it is this is the strongest Hebrew constitution to indicate a change of state in life, purpose, pleasure, and presented. Note, the change to state is verse 7. Now, what is verse 7? Verse 7 says, if I find it here quick. I can't find that. I don't know. I'm not sure if it's verse 7 in... Oh, yeah, it says, in verse 7 it says here, and the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. When they realized that they were naked, they were not ashamed of themselves, but they did cover their outer part. But to leave and to cleave, you know, we don't just leave father and mother's house. There's other things when we get married that we have to leave. And that might be some of our other friends. Because now we are one. We are brought together. You know, in our day, when a couple got married, they didn't hang out so much with their old friends anymore. Because they were brought together in one flesh. And that means together. The one don't go one way and the other one goes another way. I might be old-fashioned here, but that's the way I feel. When you are married and you are brought together, you don't forsake your old friends, but you are together as a marriage. And God made the two different sects for you. And it brings you together. Man don't hang with man, and woman don't hang with woman. Now it upsets me something awful. Now we listen sometimes. We have usually listen to TV on during the week. The Wheel of Fortune or Jeopardy. And when they introduce themselves, and he might ask a woman who's in the audience with her, and she might say, her wife. It turns me off. Something fierce. Or he might say to the man who's in the audience with you, and he'll say, my husband. That's not biblical. God didn't have that in mind. Not at all. All right, I need to move on. I want to move on here now. Now we want to go to one of the greatest love stories in the Bible. Of course, that's the love of God, of course. But in Genesis here. In Genesis chapter 24, we have there where Abraham sends out his servant to get a wife for Isaac. And we're all familiar with that story. But it really relates a beautiful picture of a love story here. You know, where Abraham sends out his servant to go get Isaac a wife. Now, Isaac is about 40 years old here. You'd think... You would think now he would be old enough to make his own decisions by this time, but that's not what Abraham had in mind. Abraham was concerned that God would direct him, his servant, to the right woman for Isaac to become his wife. And we find here that just prior to this, Sarah, which is Abraham's wife, and Isaac's mother, passed away. Just in the chapter before this, and she's buried. And it says, and Abraham was old and well stricken in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things, and we know that. And it says, and Abraham said unto his eldest servant, unto his eldest servant of his house, that ruled over all that he had, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh. Now here Abraham is getting his servant to swear that he would do as Abraham wanted him to do. Now, first of all, he wanted Abraham. Abraham wanted his servant to go back to the land where he came from to get a wife for Isaac. Well, we know that God took Abraham out of an idolatrous country, but Abraham was concerned. And where Abraham was dwelling was a lot of pagan worship. And Abraham was concerned that Isaac would get a woman for his wife, that would be of the same faith that Isaac was. And to cut the story short, I need to do that. We find that Abraham's servant gets sent out, and he finds a woman that he prayed, and the Lord sent him right to the woman that he had there for Isaac. And now you want to, if you want to read it sometime, read chapter 24 of Genesis, and you'll find how God worked in that relationship, in that marriage, to bringing them together. And as we look back over our life, we would probably say that as we look back over our life, when God was directing us to our mate, we can probably see somewhere that God's hand was in it. And if God's hand's in it, it was meant for you. And then we find that we finally get down to we're still in chapter 24, but we get down to verse 62, where, let's back up a little bit. Verse 58, when they were getting ready to leave, it says, and they called Rebekah and said unto her, wilt thou go with this man? And she said, I will go. And they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant, and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said unto her, thou art our sister. Thou shalt be mother for thousands of millions, and let thy seed possess the gate of those that hate them. And Rebekah arose and her damsel, and they rode upon the camels, and followed the man, and the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now here the woman, Rebekah, leaves her father, her brothers, her sisters, her family, to meet a man that she was going to get married to, that she never saw. So they're on their way. Can you imagine the anxiety that is being, and the pressure that is being put upon her? Now, look here. Verse 62. And Isaac came out, and Isaac came from the way of the well of the Sertor, for he dwelt in the south country. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field at eveningtide. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. Now, what do you think went through his mind? He knew that the servant was sent out. He knew that the camels left. Don't you think maybe he was watching? When are these camels coming home? Are they going to come home with a bride? Or are they going to come home without a bride? Because if you read there, Abraham said unto his servant, his servant said, what if the woman don't come along? And Abraham said, you're clear. You did your part. But Abraham had faith that God's going to send a wife for his son Isaac. Isaac goes out in the field at eveningtide. after a day's work. The cool breezes may be starting to come across the fields. He goes out there to meditate, to think. What do you think he was thinking about? Well, when are these camels coming? Are they going to come? If they do come, what is she going to look like? Is she going to be kind? Unruly? I don't think so. I don't think he had that in mind. He was just watching for those camels. And it says, now, he was out there in the field. Now, the camels are coming. He lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. And Rebekah was behind the servant there, and, and Rebekah lifted up her eyes. And when she saw Isaac, she lighted off the camel. And she said unto the servant, what man is this in the field to meet us? And the servant said, it is my master. Therefore she took a veil and covered herself. And the servant took Isaac, and the servant told Isaac all things that he had done. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her. Praise the Lord. He loved her. And Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. He had just lost his mother. Somewhere in chapter 25 and verse 20, it says, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife. So here he was 40 years old. Just lost his mother. Quite a long time to be living with your mother. So he needed some comfort. He needed someone to take his mother's place. But it says, and he loved her. Isn't that the key of every marriage? That he loved her. And Isaac was comforted by his mother's death. You know, his wife took the place, I don't know if I should say it that way, but she took the place to comfort Isaac, just like a mother. You know, Isaac, I believe, was blessed. We know he was. He was blessed because of Rebekah. And Rebekah was blessed because of Isaac. She left her country. She left her people to come to be the bride of a man she never met before. Now, we didn't have to go through that. But when we took our maid and we stood at the altar and we made those marriage vows before the person that was performing the marriage and also God. And as we did this, and as we went along in life, day after day, our faith, our love, it should have anyhow, became stronger. And as it becomes stronger, you become more bound together. You don't always agree, no. But you learn to disagree sometimes. And that's what gives you more faith sometimes. When you don't agree and you have to make adjustments, you try and figure out which is the best. And you have to compromise sometimes. And in doing that, it draws you closer. But remember, always keep God in the center of your marriage. You read about that you read it in the love chapter. And it was just the other evening in the Daily Bread that we read it, the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, the love chapter. And that's often, and I did it too already. I use that sometimes at a marriage ceremony. But actually, it's not for that. But it conveys a tremendous... when Paul wrote that, there was trouble in the church. But if we take that and apply that to our marriage, if there's trouble in our marriage, it's going to correct that too if you go by that, because love never faileth. Charity never faileth. It wanteth not, it's not puffed up, seeketh not his own, and on it goes. So, I trust that as we go on in our life, that we might just treat our mate in such a way that God would be pleased. And that if we have him first, if we as the head of the home reverence our wife the way that Christ loved the church, there's going to be love at home. And sometimes, if a husband loves his wife as Christ loved the church, the wife will not have a problem to be submissive to her husband. Now, the husband is not greater in value in God's eyes than the woman, because he made them both. And they're both on the same level. But the man, the husband, is supposed to be the head of the home, the leadership in the home. And as he does that, and is submissive to God, not a dictator, but submissive to God. And it says that the best thing that a man can do, that a father can do for his children, is to love their mother. And that's true. Let's stand together for closing prayer.